Hey everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Josh.
And I'm Sarah.
And we are the Hiking Fools. We love having you here. We're guiding you through the trails of Glacier National Park. And if you're listening to this episode, it's very likely that you listened to part one. If not, go back and check it out because that brings us up to the point at where we're going to start this episode. So we're talking Great Northern Railroad. And the reason we are, Sarah, just because it increases appreciation of the park. Knowing some of the history behind it and how it got to, be in existence and what came before us and, leading up to today. It's a good thing to know and give you the full picture. And so, as I mentioned, once in a while, we step off the trail to discuss and explore something different. So the Great Northern Railroad and its role in the creation of Glacier National Park and, even things like tourism, and conservation. We're going to get into, I think, a little bit more about conservation of the park because as soon as we came in here and loved what we saw and, visited and built lodges and chalets, then we realized, whoa, slow down. Like we need to protect and preserve this. And that's where the national park status came from and some key players in that over the years. So I think that's where we're going to go in this episode, Sarah. So the tourism, we've got the railroad is established from one end of the park to the other. And we've got visitation, with the Amtrak. You mentioned it, and you mentioned how James J. Hill was called the Empire Builder. It still is the name of the train that exists today, the Empire Builder from the Midwest out to the West Coast. And you can ride on it. I mean, it's still running, and the Amtrak is a great option to come in and enjoy the park, enjoy the area. The section that you would be of interest, is Whitefish to kind of Essex area, East Glacier area, from one end of the park to the other. And check out the schedule. It arrives fairly early and takes off fairly late, or vice versa from places. And so pay attention to that. But you can ride that. We've had some great times on the Amtrak train.
Yeah, we have. So if the train is coming from Seattle and headed east, you can board in Whitefish about 7:26 a.m. Sometimes they're running behind, so it's always good to...
So you better say about 7:30, maybe not.
Well, they say to arrive about 30 minutes to 45 minutes early. Oh, okay. So get in there, figure out, where the train is. You can call to, there's usually someone there, and when the train is getting close. Yeah. Otherwise, it's actually kind of deserted in the station. Yeah. The train station is historic, too, so it's kind of cool to go in there. Yeah. But we have rode the Empire Builder in the wintertime. It was the Christmas train. So we rode it as a family, and we had family visiting from back east, and we all rode it together, and we boarded the train early in the morning, and the snow was falling on the platform. It was so beautiful and magical. And as soon as we boarded, we had... when you board in the morning, make sure you're quiet when you board because there were passengers on there sleeping that, something you don't think about, I guess, people who have probably been on the train for hours and it's morning. So we're pumped up, but there's people sleeping. So we made our way to the observation car, and that's where we parked ourselves as we wound our way in and out the southern area of Glacier National Park, and the snow was falling, and we're watching the forest, and we got off the platform in Essex. So Essex is about halfway between East Glacier and West Glacier. We spent the day there skiing and just enjoying all the winter sports that fat tire Isaac biking Walton had to offer.
When we got back on the train, though, I have to say it was dark and cold. And so as our friend Matt says, maybe look at this in the summer. I mean, it's beautiful as the snow is falling, but it's a good option in the summer when we have 16 plus hours of daylight here in this area. And that's something to know as you plan your hikes and plan your days. There is a ton of daylight. I mean, be prepared for anything. But when you're out on the trail, I mean, hey, you get out there early in the 5-6 o'clock hour, and you can hike until 10:30. I mean, you can hike until 10. Bring a headlamp. We've been caught a few times, but anyway, there's a ton of access to the park through that train. And of course, after the railroad was built, some years, I think in the mid-century, people started a huge development change all that with the motor car, and so people started to drive out here and take it upon themselves. But that changed a lot. But the tourism part of the railroad was now coming into effect after the creation of Glacier National Park in 1910.
So I had mentioned in part one about George Bird Grinnell, and I'm sure if you've been to Glacier or researched coming to Glacier, you've heard this name come up. So he has He was a very important person who helped establish Glacier National Park, and he has a glacier named after him. That was Grinnell Glacier was one of his favorite places to explore. He loved that area, and he has a mountain named after him, 2 mountains named after him, Grinnell Point and Mount Grinnell. So he was a big deal out here. So him and James J. Hill they knew each other well, and they collaborated together to help secure the future of Glacier National Park. George Bird Grinnell shared the idea with James in 1891 about lobbying Congress and to designate this region, what is now Glacier National Park, to become a national park. And, as I mentioned before, George came out here and explored what is now Glacier, and he made friends with the indigenous people, the Blackfeet, and he hunted with them along St. Mary Lake. There's awesome books out there about them, but he wrote in Forest and Stream from 1880 to 1911 about his experience and what he saw out here. So he also played a huge role. And when James J. Hill retired, as I mentioned, Lewis, his son, kind of took over with that passion and continued lobbying Congress. Like, come on, we need to make this a national park. And it did finally become a national park in 1910. Glacier is the 10th national park to be established. So that was a really big deal to protect this area and keep it from major development. And as I mentioned before, Lewis was in charge of promoting and building these chalets that he did and the lodges. So East Glacier is outside the park, as I mentioned. We have St. Mary. They had Going to the Sun chalets, Many Glacier Hotel, the 2 Medicine Chalet Complex, Sperry and Granite Park Chalet. So we have the lodges still, but we only have 2 remaining chalets that were built by the Great Northern Railroad, and that's Granite Park Chalet and Sperry Chalet. And, because they're constructed of stone, they're very sturdy, and they have withstood a lot over the many years that they've been built. And we've discussed before that the dorm room of Sperry Chalet has burnt down, but thanks to the Glacier Conservancy has been rebuilt, and we can appreciate when we go there the history, the rich history that is in these chalets.
For sure. Yeah. We've had the fortunate opportunity to stay at both of the remaining chalets, and they're terrific places to get in a little bit more into the backcountry of Glacier, kind of a starting off point. Sperry's obviously right near the glacier, and Granite, you can get up and over some passes and cross the Continental Divide. But check out another episode on Sperry Chalet, because there's a lot that goes into reserving that, securing a place to do that. But it's a kind of a once in a lifetime adventure.
And as I mentioned before, Hugh Monroe, that's a pretty dominant name. He came out here in the early 1800s, first white man recorded to be in this area, and he friended the Blackfeet and married a Blackfeet woman. But we also had a U.S. Army Lieutenant John Van Orsdale in 1873. He was the first white American recorded, at least, to see one of the glaciers. He climbed over Cut Bank Pass, and he viewed the glaciers. And he wrote in 1883, quoting, "A great benefit would result to Montana if this section would be set aside as a national park." So that was, way back in 1883. So people who came out here realized this is a really beautiful area. We should protect this land to make sure there wasn't any development.
Well, you said it, conservation. They had to strike a good balance between conservation and tourism and promotion. If the Americans could be persuaded that the mountains out here were, every bit as magnificent as the Alps of Switzerland, they would buy train tickets. And the railroad began promoting the region as the American Alps, as we mentioned, and the Great Northern proudly proclaimed itself the route to Glacier National Park. So they really took advantage of, the ability to promote this once the railroad had reached, and they've accomplished all of these feats of getting in, up and over passes. They really started to be, honestly, in the tourism industry. And they're marketing and promoting the area to citizens who loved it. And so they're out here exploring, and further developments occur, as you said, with some of the lodges and chalets and things like that. But let's talk after the break, Sarah, a little bit more about conservation of the park and kind of development and where we are today. And we just want to say a quick thank you to Snappy Sports Center, a great outfitter right here in Kalispell, as a sponsor of this show. We'll stick around. We'll be right there.
For everything summer in Montana, think Snappy's. Snappy Sports Center is not only your fishing and hunting headquarters, they're also stocked with hiking boots, backpacks, camping gear, bear spray, and outdoor clothing for the whole family. Located on the corner of Highways 2 and 35 on your way to Glacier Park and away from the traffic on Highway 93. Forgot something? They probably have it. Need something? They definitely have it. Skip the traffic and stock up on adventure with Snappy Sports Center, a store like no other since 1947.
Trees with deep roots stand strong, and so do we. Freedom Bank has been rooted in Columbia Falls for over 20 years, serving the whole Flathead Valley with state-of-the-art banking. Whether you're banking from your cabin, campsite, or kayak, we've got you covered. Freedom Bank, rooted here, ready everywhere. We want to be your bank. Give us a call at 892-1776. Member FDIC.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. We definitely appreciate Freedom Bank as a sponsor of this show. Makes it possible that we can share all of this with you, share our experiences, share some of the knowledge that we've accumulated over the years. And with the Great Northern Railroad, I mean, things have changed over the years. For a while there, for nearly 3 decades, Great Northern enjoyed something like a monopoly on travel to Glacier National Park. If you wanted to experience Glacier, chances were you arrived by train. But then, later on, construction began on what would become eventually the Going to the Sun Road, and people had automobiles. And after difficult construction, the narrow roadway was open, and travelers were a little bit more in charge of their own experience. But the railroad was the beginning of all this. It brought people here. And Sarah, you've got your father actually worked with the railroad for many years.
Yeah, my dad retired working for the railroad back around the Great Lakes. And so I grew up being around trains and kind of like being super excited, but also knowing that hearing his stories and how dangerous it was working for the railroad, being really respectful of trains as well. My dad would often work a double shift. And so my mom would take my sister and I into the train yard there to bring him a lunch. And we would see train engines parked and running and humming. And I was just in awe at how big and powerful these were, and are today. And I have a lot of respect for the train systems and, just the workers too. These guys work so hard and they do all sorts of different things. And one of my fondest memories growing up with my dad working for the railroad was going to the Christmas train. So every Christmas, the train would, with an engine full of passenger cars, pull inside the garage, I guess it would be called. And each car would be decorated with a different Christmas type theme, and even down to like a miniature train set. And you would board the train at the engine and you'd walk through, and in the caboose, Santa would be there. And so he'd sit on his lap and you would, get presents and stuff. And it was decked out with Christmas lights and there'd be music playing. And I just thought that was really, really cool.
Yeah, you've got quite a personal connection, to all of this. And it's still neat. Isn't it still impressive? Our kids, like, there's a train, and especially just the massive, powerful, and the speed at which it's going. And on this southern sector of Glacier National Park, you see them up and over bridges and over the water, over the river. And it's just incredible to watch, really.
Yeah, and there's a few hikes. If you hike at any trailhead going into the southern part of Glacier Park, there's a few hikes where you actually cross the track. So knowing that that's private property and it's dangerous, make sure you cross quickly, look both ways, obviously, and move through there rather quickly.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, some of the other hikes we've talked about, Firebrand Pass, the Lubeck, the Autumn Creek Trail, Lubeck Trailhead, Harrison Lake, some of the lookouts in that southern sector. Yeah, you're going to cross over a lot of the instruction is cross over the railroad tracks or ford the river and head on your way, find the trail on the other side. So it's a lot of interaction with the railroad even today.
Yeah, and I just want to point out too that back in March of 1970, the Great Northern Railroad merged with several other railroads.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the Northern Pacific, the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad, Spokane, Portland, and Seattle Railroad. And that was the Burlington Northern. And then in September 1995, it merged with the Santa Fe. So it's the BNSF is what is currently today.
Yep. And I think it came from the familiar goat emblem. It was of the Great Northern. Gradually, disappeared from locomotives and stations, but its legacy remains embedded in Glacier National Park. You'll see that everywhere. The white mountain goat, symbolism of Glacier.
Absolutely, in the Great Northern Railroad. Yeah, it's everywhere throughout the park.
And we're not going to get too much into it right now, but on another episode, potentially, we're going to talk a little bit about great eats and places to go, outside of the park. And a Great Northern Bar and Grill in Whitefish, Montana is still a place that people love. Great music and just a pretty neat place to descend upon if you're a traveler or tourist. Be careful, Northwest Montana has its own unique personality, but you'll see some, just to mention, you'll see some resemblance of Glacier and how it permeates the culture around here.
I remember celebrating my 21st birthday at the Great Northern Bar back when I worked out in the park. Actually, when we were working in the park, your parents got on the Empire Builder back in the Midwest, I think St. Paul, St. Cloud area, and took the train. They got a sleeper car and they came out here and spent a week in Glacier. That's the first time I had ever met them. And that was, they had a lot of stories talking about their travels across the plains and being on the train and seeing the sights and the scenery. And, it's kind of interesting.
What an adventure. So, and it's as a reminder, there are so many resources out there, books that have been written, local museums or historical societies that have so much. I'm sure BNSF Great Northern has resources themselves and lots of, things to dig into if you want to really learn more. So we're kind of introducing the topic here and how it relates to Glacier. And we, as the Hiking Fools, just have such a really fascination with the railroad. And, Sarah, you talked a little bit about it already, how it relates to some of your childhood, some of your life, but it's still fun. I mean, who doesn't pump their arm when they see it?
I still do it. Yeah. I have to confess to everyone that I still pump my arm when I see a train, and I make sure I make eye contact with the conductor and I give an old pump, and they usually give me a toot, and I have to OCD count the cars, like how many cars is the train pulling? Oh my gosh, it's got 4 engines that are hauling this load, and what's in there, if they're coal cars or freight cars or whatever. I like to, and we've stayed also at what it was Isaac Walton Inn, and that hotel, which is located in Essex, was built for the workers for the Great Northern Railroad, and it's now a hotel. It was a lodge, and it is now closed, unfortunately. I'm hoping someone grabs a hold of that, because if you go in there, it still kind of reflects the railroad history with, lights and...
Absolutely. And you could stay in train cars, right? I mean,
yes,
they've still got the places, for a little bit larger groups or families. It's really cool.
Yeah, they have engines, cabooses, cars that you can stay in there. So I'm really hoping that someone grabs a hold of that and it reopens it, because it's really something special.
Yeah, how much the railroad has affected the visitation of the park, leading to the conservation of the park, the construction around the park. It just can't be understated what the Great Northern and now BNSF meant to Glacier National Park. And it brought people here for the appreciation of it. And then, key influential voices over the years kind of, as you mentioned, lobbied, to preserve and protect this place. And it's still intertwined. The history and, of the railroad in this area is still intertwined. So we've spoken a lot about that, the major folks that were responsible for that originally getting out here to the American West and how they promoted it and how people bought into that vision and who supported it. And, we're thankful today. I mean, that's why initially people were able to, come into Glacier and dig a little bit deeper into it, how the railroad affected, the travel within the park with the chalets and the lodges. And, today it's just kind of fun to recognize that and understand and, observe what that meant, to Glacier, and it still does. And so we love kind of hiking around and checking out the trails and sometimes crossing the tracks and just witness, it's magnificent how much the Great Northern Railroad has been a part of Glacier National Park.
So I challenge you the next time you see a train to give a little arm pump. See if the conductor responds.
We've had some great personal experience, and if you have, let us know. We're out there on Instagram at HikingFoolsMT, and you can check out some of our latest adventures, and we'd appreciate the engagement. Reach out and see what you've been doing, and boy, we hope to see you on the trail at some point. Keep an eye out. But to check out more episodes, you can learn where to hike, how to hike, what our recommendations are, things you need for the hike, and things that you might appreciate and enjoy. And check out more episodes online. Tune in if you're local, and remember to follow us on the major podcast platforms, including Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, everywhere you get your podcasts. I'm Josh.
And I'm Sarah.
And we are the Hiking Fools, encouraging you to always go